Welcome to New Mexico Black Rifle Operators Union. I'm your host, Sean. Well, today has been a hard day for me. Today would have been my dad's 83rd birthday today. As promised, though, I'll talk about that stuff a little bit later. I looked into what's going on with the suppressors being removed from the NFA. That's not a thing after all. What has actually happened was there was a ruling that said, and this was done, of course, again in Texas, where it is, I believe, Kansas, Missouri, Texas, and I want to say Montana allow you to have suppressors that you built yourself. And the federal government sued Texas, the state of Texas. And Ken Paxton, being the good guy that he is, said, no, you're not suing me. We're going to take this to court, and we're going to see what happens. Basically, this boils down to states' rights. So Texas and those other states that allow suppressors without any problems because, well, why would you have a problem with a muffler that makes a gun safer for anyone that's shooting it or that's around it? That makes too much sense to our federal government, so they're fighting it, of course. So it's going to be on the docket eventually because that's how lawfare works. On a better note, the Shush Act is going through Congress right now, and this is to remove a bill that the House is trying to pass, which we've all had this hype before, where the House Republicans, one of them gets a wild hair and decides to try to do this, where they put a law up that says, hey, we're going to deregulate or take the suppressors off the NFA. That's what should happen. Okay, there's more evolving with this machine gun case. That's the best way to put that. Overall, if you didn't get from me last night, while I am hopeful that something can be done, the odds that actually happens are few and far between. In reality, this doesn't really affect us unless the Supreme Court somehow gets this. But that's what's going on with those two items as promised. I promised tonight I would actually dig into what's going on with the suppressor thing because kind of would like to have a suppressor of my own at some point. I've shot pistols and rifles that have them. It makes sense for a lot of reasons, especially for like my MP5. That would be really cool to have a suppressor. But it made me think about my dad and all the boomerisms. My dad famously said this to me, that he would carry a 46 if he could, but the biggest they ever made was a 45. It wasn't until later that they brought out the 480 or the 500 or even the 50 A&E, and my dad looked at the Desert Eagle and he decided that wasn't the gun for him because if he was going to carry something that big, he would want a revolver. Which I understand for a number of reasons, especially if you're older. But I was thinking of more so along the lines of, what my dad left me. What kind of legacy my dad left me. And the 2A is a big part of that, especially with my family. And I was thinking about the guns that I have in my collection that my dad was exceptionally proud of because someone in his family had them, if not him. One of them was the M1 Tanker. To me, it'll never go away, but it's not one of those guns I actually think is really practical. I actually like the standard M1 that I inherited when my dad passed away. More than I like the Tanker because it's loud and obnoxious is what the Tanker is, especially in a 30-06 and it's such a short rifle. But I was thinking about what I've done to pass that legacy on to my kids. My kids are active shooters. And I don't mean like at those stupid places or doing stupid things. I mean they actually go out and shoot. My daughter carries a SIG pistol as her personal carry choice. She has an AR-15. So does my youngest son. My oldest son likes the Kalashnikov. They have all shot Mauser rifles. If there was one legacy in my family, it was that the K98 is king. My brothers, myself, my kids, we all have access to or own K98 rifles, either the original German, OG German rifle, or we have a modern sporting rifle that was made from a Mauser action. And, there's some truth to be said about what Boomer said, that the Mauser action can hold just about anything. I've seen them up to 416 Remington Magnum, and that's a big boy, that's a lot of lead there. So that action definitely holds up, and if you think about when it was designed, Paul Mauser lost an eye when he was making a semi-automatic rifle because of an explosion that didn't go right. As I've said before, and we talk about this, you're controlling a miniature explosion inches away from your face each time you do this. And certain actions, certain types of actions, are capable of supporting that cup pressure or that instantaneous pressure curve that happens when you detonate a round. The Mauser is one of those. And I remember bringing home a Mauser book when I was younger, a collector's book, and my dad tried to find one for me, but he could never find it because it was out of print. But I had made the lofty goal when I was probably about 10 or 12 that I wanted to collect every Mauser possible. I didn't realize the scope and breadth of what I just said, and I don't think my dad did at the time either. My dad at the time probably thought there was the German Mauser, the different year iterations of the Spanish Mauser and the Spanish Mauser. He knew about the German Low Mausers, which were 7mm specifically, but Low is actually the company that Mauser, the manufacturing house that Mauser owned, one of them, and they produced them everywhere. He knew about the 6.5 by 55 Swedish Mauser. He knew about other Mausers, but he didn't know what I had learned, not only from that book, but from being the nerd that I am, the gun nerd that I am. Mausers, if you didn't know, were the Kalashnikov of the day. And what I mean by that is everyone's aunt, mother, and dog country on planet Earth adopted a Mauser or a Mauser derivative, so much so that the American 1903 actually had to pay royalties to Mauser because of its design, because it was so much like a K98 that they had to pay royalties to Paul Mauser and his family and the design firm because it was that much of a ripoff, specifically the stripper clips. That is something that changed the dynamics of warfare. The first time the United States ever ran into anyone that was carrying a Mauser was during the Spanish-American War, and we promptly dropped the 3040 Craig in favor of, the 1903 Springfield. And the reason why we did that is because we found that guys with 5-round stripper clips could outshoot us in a fight. And Americans, that's not going to last. You go to Germany. Germany is the heart and soul of where Paul Mauser and his brother Mauser, I don't remember his name, but I remember Paul. They built the Mauser. They designed the Mauser, the first iterations of them. And if you watch the design, the first bolt-action gun that ever came out was kind of a weird derivative of a breech-loading gun and a actual bolt gun. And it actually used a long needle that extended through a paper cartridge to hit a priming compound or a primer. I'm still dubious about what that is exactly because it's so ancient. And it would detonate the cartridge, and the gun would go off. Well, if you expose that much of the firing pin to the corrosive elements of powder and the priming compounds and the primer itself, you start to corrode, and they would break and damage. Fast forward, Paul Mauser seeing that design, maybe even fiddling with it a little bit, he started his first iteration. I think the first one was 1851 or 1860 something is when they started messing around with the Mauser design. And the first iterations you see, you have 2 locking lugs on the front of the bolt. Later on, Paul would design the 3rd locking lug, which is, if you go back about 3/4 of the way down the bolt body, that is, there's a rectangular lug that's right on the same side as the bolt handle itself. And that would lock into a recess in the back of the receiver so that it would hopefully save a breached cartridge, because that was a bigger thing when metallic cartridges were first manufactured, is that they had flaws in them and they would rupture sometimes. And this would protect you from that wrong detonation. At least that's by their design. The intent was. Imagine, this would be like getting a 747 in the 1800s. About the same time that Hiram Maxim was designing his infamous Maxim machine gun, Paul Mauser was putting the finishing design touches on the Mauser rifle. And if you think about it in terms of the world, every country in the world and adopted a version of that, either an 8mm, not 9mm. Actually, there may be a 9mm, a 9x61, if I think about it right, that I know that you could use for hunting. But they used 7mm Mauser 6.5. The Swedes, the Danes, pretty much every European power except for the French, I believe, and they used their Berthier rifles for bolt-action rifles. But everyone else did. The English went a little different direction. They went with the Enfield because that was their local manufacturer. Right up until the end of World War II, you saw a lot of interesting designs from Britain because they still had a culture, the 2A. They believed in having firearms, even if it was just for war. Nowadays, you don't see so much. Design has kind of petered off in the rest of the world because they've went away from their gun-loving roots, unlike the Americans. And I don't see the Americans slowing down. But it made me think a lot about Dad today. Just all the little things, and tonight I thought I'd honor my dad like I do every year at this time, today being his birthday, not the day he died. I won't celebrate the day he died, but I'll damn sure celebrate the day he was born, because he was an impressive man that gave me a lot of knowledge between him and my uncles and my brothers that seems to have put me in this weird position where I love guns. I love the design elements of it because I always got a history lesson when I got to go into my uncle's reloading shed with my dad and my brothers, or when we were cleaning the guns at home. My dad, he would give me the little lowdown on how that gun was designed and where it came from. And you think about it, it's sad to think about this though, but a lot of those beautiful K98s may have been built by Jewish prisoners. There's a lot of history in the 2A. And you have to get past some of that. If you like the Mauser rifles like I do, you're going to have to get past the fact that there's an actual Waffenamt, which is a military acceptance mark from the Nazis on a lot of the guns. You can do the research and find out when the gun was manufactured, roughly. And that's kind of an interesting tidbit if you think about it. Any of the World War II guns that you see from Germany specifically are going to be stamped with 1932 always. And the reason why that is, it's 1932. That's when the Germans had to conform to the Treaty of Versailles. And that was a fake stamp that basically said that, the Germans could have this in inventory. It was a way of getting past the Treaty of Versailles because they didn't claim a lot of these, specialty guns that they would later make. And if you know the story of the German war machine, the World War II war machine specifically, the manufacturing machine, you know that the Germans built a lot of amazing things, over-engineered a lot of things, and never were set or content with what they designed. Up till the end of the war, they were producing brand new Wunderwaffe, wonder weapons, including small arms. They couldn't settle on one pistol like the United States, one service rifle, one, machine pistol or submachine gun, or maybe two of each. Instead, the Germans had the K-98. Hitler loved it from World War One. They had the G-43. They had the G-41, the STG-44, not to mention all the captured rifles that they would reuse. A lot of Polish Mausers ended up in German circulation for the German military. So did a lot of Belgian Mausers, specifically, and Yugo Mausers. Because as the Germans took those territories, they repurposed that manufacturing to just continue cranking out 8mm Mausers used by the German army. And the idea with the German army in World War II, the Wehrmacht, was to keep the support of the MG42 and the MG34, which were all-purpose, light machine guns or heavy machine guns, depends on how you look at that. They would put one of those in a squad, and everyone else had a job of keeping it fed. And to protect that gun, they would use a Mauser rifle or a submachine gun. That was a German doctrine at the time. It wasn't until they realized that, and they went against Hitler's mandate, they made the STG-44 and realized they stumbled onto some secret sauce that they probably should have been manufacturing at the beginning of the war. Would have saved resources and would have given a lot more firepower to a squad of infantry. And those are the stories and the type of things that my dad used to like to tell me about. Those are those little history pieces. It wasn't for a long time that I had heard boomer knowledge that the Japanese rifles were so bad. Well, Japanese rifles were actually just modified Mauser designs. What gives them their provenance of failure is that the Japanese, like the Germans, couldn't settle on one caliber at one point, because Japanese people are still, to this day, kind of smaller statured than Germans or Americans. And they needed something with a little less recoil, so they went to a 6.5 instead of a 7.7. And what happened when American soldiers would pick up a rifle is they wouldn't necessarily know what ammunition type it was designed for, bring it back to the States, and put the wrong ammunition in it, and it would go kaboom. Now, there are some last-ditch German and Japanese rifles that had some questionable metallurgy, meaning that they didn't have the finishing that they would have done at the beginning of the war, because they were at the end of the war where they were almost fully conquered and beaten. They had to make some exceptions to make the arms they needed to produce to put out in the war. There was even, in Germany, there were even some bolt-action rifles and semi-automatic rifles that used the 8mm quartz round, and they were called Volksgewehrs, people's guns. Last-ditch rifles to try to save the Nazi war machine. It didn't work. You can't spin up your industrial plant against the American industrial plant and expect to win. It's just not going to happen. There's too much here, manufacturing might. That's what's so disappointing when you look at the world right now, is we've offloaded a lot of our manufacturing to other countries when we can damn sure do a better job of it here and keep those jobs and those resources here in the United States, that is. But that's the type of thing that runs through my head when I think about my dad. The times my dad took me shooting, times my dad would take me fishing. My dad's giving me crap for doing something stupid, but then my dad also gently giving me the comfort when I wasn't expecting it. So, Pop, I love you. Like, share, subscribe. Most importantly, be great. Go out and enjoy some rounds this weekend, because that's what I'm going to do.